So the presentation that is online is an earlier version of this. So if there's a discrepancy with your notes, it's just because I just finished preparing this slide deck right now, but I'll upload the new presentation online on iCampus after the class. So we've already talked about unit commitment, and I wanted to spend another lecture talking about it. We discussed how to model the problem and how to deal with its size, but we haven't discussed how you design markets around it. And if you notice, this pattern in the class is repeating. You first see a model, you discuss how you solve it centrally, what the KKT conditions are centrally, and then we discuss ways that you can send prices to different agents so that they can reproduce the optimal solution for a centralized problem. So before jumping into market design for unit commitment, I'll talk to you about the two settlement system, which is the way the day-ahead market, where the unit commitment is solved, interacts with the real-time market. And then I'll jump into market design, and I'll finish the unit commitment lecture with some discussion of combined cycle units. Okay, so we have a broad spectrum of different market designs for day-ahead unit commitments. So you can have, well, let me say something before that. When you are thinking of trading electricity, years or months or weeks in advance of actually trading it, you can just let people go out and find partners to trade with. And in contrast, in real time, you cannot just wait for people to agree on a trade, because in real time you have to avoid the blackout. So in real time, the system operator controls generators, tells them what to do, and sets up also a market around it and pays people prices depending on what they did. But the bottom line is that in real time, the system operator decides what people do. And so things are very centralized when you're operating in real time. They're very decentralized way before things happen. So you can, even if the system operator today will take over control of your generator, that doesn't prevent you from having made deals with partners years in advance and enter forward contracts. So things are very decentralized here, very tight control in real time, and at some point, as you're approaching real time, you have to decide when the system operator starts telling people what they need to do with their generators. And that happens around 24 hours before real time. So 24 hours before real time, you really need to decide, will I need this big station on? They will need 24 hours to start up, so the system operator has to step in and tell them, okay, you're going to start or you're not going to start. So that's where the day-ahead market takes place. And the way we design a day-ahead market is sitting somewhere in between a very centralized auction and a very decentralized bilateral trade format. And different countries, different markets do it different ways, and I'll show you different varieties of this. So there's a big debate about how centralized, so how much the day-ahead market should be controlled by auction prices like the real-time market, or we should just let people trade bilaterally in the day-ahead market like we do in forward. And we will see two versions of this. One is more decentralized, it's called an exchange, and the other is a pool, which is way more centralized. Europe is going with exchanges, the United States is working with pools, and we'll see how they're different in terms of what prices they produce. But before talking to you about that, I want to give you a high-level view of how the real-time market interplays with the day-ahead market. So what the day-ahead market is basically a forward market for electricity. Have any of you taken finance? in financial engineering classes? So the word forward contract rings a bell, or not really? Doesn't bug you. So I won't make any analogies to forward contracts. So I'll just spell it out for you, show you how these two markets interact, and then you can see some interesting side effects. And if someone decides to enter in the day-ahead market, if a generator decides to participate in the day-ahead market, they don't have to, but if they do, there are some benefits there. The benefit is basically that you can lock in a day-ahead price if you like it. You can lock it in and sell at that price. And if you do what you promised when you locked in that price, so if you produce the quantity you promised you produce, then the real-time price doesn't affect you. You just get paid the day-ahead price. Now, if the real-time price is high enough, you might want to produce more than you promised in your forward contract. So if real-time conditions are beneficial for you, you can produce more. But if you, but on the other hand, you avoid the risk of very low prices, and you stay with your day-ahead price. The way this is the intuitive reason of why you want to participate in the day-ahead market. And here's a formal explanation. So here's how settlements, obligations and settlements work in the day-ahead market. Suppose that the price in the day-ahead for electricity is P1. And suppose that I commit in the day-ahead market, I decide to enter it and sell Q1, a certain quantity of energy. Now, the moment I take a position in that market, I create an obligation for myself, a financial obligation. And the moment I take this position, I will get paid the day-ahead price for whatever quantity I offer. But if in real time I end up doing something different from Q1, then I have to, then there's other payments that take place. If in real time I end up producing more than I promised in the day ahead, then for the difference, for the extra quantity, I get paid the real-time price, which is P0. If I end up producing less, then I have to buy this deficit at the real-time price. So if you think about it intuitively, it makes a lot of sense. So the revenue that you earn once you enter a forward contract depends also not on what you did when you entered the forward contract, but also what you do in real time. Okay? If you overproduce in real time, then you get paid the real-time price for the overproduction. If you underproduce in real time, you have to buy yourself out of it. And if you think about it, it's only fair that things should be done that way, because the person, suppose that you underproduce, the person that you entered the forward agreement with is going to ask you, hey, where's my power? You promised me Q1. And you only produced Q0, and you turn around to him and tell him, well, actually I bought it from the real-time market at the real-time price. But the problem is I got exposed to the real-time price. Now, if you look at this equation, it's ridiculously simple, but very strong at the same time. So, by the way, for loads, it's the other way around. So, if a load enters the day-ahead market, they buy a certain quantity Q1 at the day-ahead price, so they pay, they don't get paid, but they pay for that power. And if they overconsume, then they pay the real-time price for the extra power. If they underconsume, they get paid the real-time price for the leftover power. But the revenue formula is the same. Now, the formula, like I said, is ridiculously simple, but it has two very powerful features. The first powerful feature is that provided I produce what I promised one day in advance, the risk that comes from uncertainty about the real-time price does not affect me at all. And this matters. For example, when you build a power station, when EDF invests in a nuclear plant, which is going to work for 40 years, and they don't have a clue about, well, they have a clue, but it's very risky how the real-time price of electricity will be for the next 40 years. What they can do before building the power plant is enter a forward agreement like this and agree in a forward price. So what I'm showing you right now is about day-ahead markets versus real-time markets, but this is generally how forward contracts work. Provided you can do in real time what you promised in advance, you get completely hedged from the real-time price risk. It's a great feature of this financial instrument. But at the same, is that clear? Does that make sense? You look a bit troubled.
When you're talking about power, is all the kind of power, like spinning reserve, or is it just one kind of?
Think of energy, no. So here by buyer, I'm referring to a buyer of energy. So the buyer of energy in 2001 in summer in California, for example, Pacific Gas and Electric, in 2001 in California, they never saw this coming, but because Enron gained the market, PG&E went bankrupt because they had to serve the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and a bunch of other areas while Enron was withholding power. So they had to buy power at the real-time price, which was enormous because of the gaming that was going on. So they were losing ridiculous sums of money every day. And so at those times, for a producer, that was a good summer because the real-time price was extremely high, but a buyer would never have wanted to deal with that P0. So they could have avoided it if they had entered forward contracts in advance at another price, P1. And so this is a great feature of forward contracts, but at the same time, suppose we now are beyond the day-ahead time frame and we enter real time. The thing to notice is that once I enter real time, this is history. What's done is done. I received that revenue. It depends on something I don't control anymore, the day-ahead price. Whatever I bought in the day-ahead market is what I bought. It's over. Same here. These are fixed now as I enter real time. And the only thing that now depends in real time on my actions is the Q0 and multiplied by the real-time price. So basically, by entering a forward contract, that does not in any way influence your incentives for real time. In real time, the price you face is the real-time price. So what the forward market does for you is it protects you from real-time price risk without distorting your incentives. You still see the real-time price for your production quantity. And so you introduce a financial instrument, it offers you the ability to hedge against risk, but at the same time it doesn't screw over your real-time incentives. So that's the two properties that are very desirable about forward contracts. Yes?
In the example you give, why did they promise like a quantity of energy that was greater than what they could afford
are you thinking now in terms of a producer?
Yeah, the producer will get...
oh, in PG&E?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they never... okay, when PG&E was making its... you never expected to have... here's a way this can happen. Okay, I'm PG&E and the summer is coming. I look at the last 40 years of summers. There's a certain price pattern, so I make forecasts about what the real-time price will be this coming summer. I'm not expecting anything crazy to happen, like I'm gaming the market. So some part of my power, I don't commit it to the day-ahead market. I let the real-time market show up because I think that the day-ahead forward price is maybe too expensive. So I leave some margin of my customers unsecured until real-time because I have reasonable expectations about what will happen in the time. Because, for example, if this P1 price is too high, then it's maybe not a good deal to enter this forward contract. So it's very likely in the portfolio of an energy company to leave some of its obligations until real time. It's possible. It certainly can happen. So that's the way in which you can fall in this situation. Now, if you're extremely risk averse, you can fully buy your position in the forward market. If people had anticipated what Enron would have done, of course they wish they would have been in forward contracts. But that's basically how this example works. Make sense?
Okay, it makes sense.
Okay, so so yeah, that's I think more or less what I want to say here. Okay, so the takeaway from this discussion is the following. Do we want a day-ahead market that works like this? Sure, it doesn't hurt us to have it there. If we want, we jump in and we participate and we protect ourselves against real-time price risk. And at the same time, we don't lose the opportunity of making profits in the real time again because we see the real-time price. So you can, it's completely optional to jump in. If you do jump in, you protect yourself against extra risk, but none of the opportunities that you would have in real time are removed. So there's no harm in introducing these markets. The question is, how do we define rules about these markets? So how do we decide, should they be auctions, should they be bilateral? Basically the same question comes up that came up with the economic dispatch problem. How should you design a market around it so that you let people make decisions on their own? And you would say, okay, let's see how we design the real-time market and apply the exact same market rules to design a day-ahead market. If they work for real-time, why wouldn't they work for day-ahead? That's the idea. Well, there is one big difference between real-time market design and day-ahead market design. In real-time markets, whatever was supposed to be committed is committed. Whatever was decided to be off is off. And the only thing you decide is production levels. In contrast, in day-ahead markets, you also decide about, do I commit a unit or not? Because it's 24 hours in advance that is the time to decide, now this guy should be committed or now this guy should be left off. And this on-off decision, this 0-1 unit commitment decision is basically a fixed cost. And if you remember, one of the conditions about competitive markets to work was well-behaved convex costs. If you've noticed this throughout the course, we've been exploiting convexity. The KKT conditions, for example, fixed costs, like unit commitment startup costs or minimum load costs, they are non-differentiable. So defining a system of a KKT system and taking the dual multiplier as the price, this all collapses. That's kind of the math programming way to view things. But the more economic way to view things, you can see this in the following example. So here's a really simple system where we're deciding. So before I show you the example, the takeaway from this example will be that just using a single price for trading energy will not be able to clear the market. This is the example that you will, this is the takeaway from the example you will see. Suppose I have a generator that has a startup cost of 3,000, not one, suppose I have a group of identical generators. Each of them has a startup cost of $3,000 and a fuel cost which is constant of $20 per megawatt hour, and they can produce up to 200 megawatts. And suppose that there's a day-ahead market, and the only commodity that is traded in this market is energy. So you get paid the market price for energy times whatever you produce. And the question I have for you is how much would you, what price would it be worth, how much would you bid in this market? How much would you bid if you didn't have the startup cost? You remember the first exercise we did in the first homework set, where you were asked to submit incremental block bids? 20. You just bid your fuel cost. Again, motivation is if you bid below your fuel cost and you're in the money, that's bad because you lose. You're getting paid a lower price than your fuel cost. If you bid above your fuel cost and you end up, you're not going to be setting the price, it's going to be the next guy after you setting the price, and you might end up bidding 21. You won't really have an influence on the market clearing price, and there might be a market clearing price of 20 and a half, so you're out of the money. So you could have made that extra half a cent. So the optimal strategy is truthful bidding with your fuel cost. But here, so suppose this market is going to run for 1 hour. Would you bid 20 here? You're gonna, if you're in the money, and there's a problem with your startup cost, right? So what's the minimum price that would want to make you wake up and move your unit? This unit, think of now, this unit will run for 1 hour. What will be its total cost? 3,000? 3,020? It's 20 per megawatt hour. Okay, 20 times its production. So if the price were anything above $20 per megawatt hour, what would be the production? So if you've already started it up, yeah, any price just above your fuel cost, you would just max out your production because you're making a bit of extra profit out of it. So if I have any price above 20 for this energy market, I will jump in and produce at my max. So my total cost will be 3,000 plus 4,000. Okay, for any price above $20 per megawatt hour, which means I will end up suffering a cost of $7,000 for that hour. Which means if I'm gonna okay, so now what I want to do is take that $7,000 cost and say, listen, man, if I'm going to participate in this energy market, I want to make sure that this is the average price you pay me for each of the 200 megawatts that I'm supplying, which means that any price you give me below $35 per megawatt hour will not do it for me. It's not worth it for me to start up. Okay? Now, at $35 per megawatt hour, I'm not going to make any profit, but I'm not gonna just be indifferent between any power production level from 0 to 200, and if you award $35 per megawatt hour, I will produce exactly 200 megawatts, because that's the only way that I'm gonna, 35 is above my fuel cost. So if you announce a market clearing price of 35, I'm gonna max out to, I'm gonna be willing to supply exactly 200 megawatts. So basically that's what you're seeing in this figure here. Any price below 35, if that's what the price that the system operator announces, nobody will be interested in it. There will be no supply available. That's the dark line here. If you announce exactly $35 per megawatt hour, you get any of these points over here as a possible supply. So at exactly $35 per megawatt hour, any of the generators in the system is indifferent between starting up and producing 200 or nothing. But they're not indifferent between starting up and producing anything between 0 and 200. If they start up, they want to produce exactly 200. And that's the source of the problem. Now, that means that no matter, if you have a single market for energy, if this is how you want to run your auction, there will be no price you can send to market participants that will make them voluntarily produce exactly 100. Any price below 35 will result in zero production, no one will be interested. Any price exactly at 35 will result in increments of 200 megawatts, and any price above 35 will result in the maximum capacity of the system. Which means if I wanted to run a day-ahead market with a single price for energy, there's the rule we've seen in economic dispatch cannot work. There is no single price of energy that will make people do, that will make supply and demand be equal. And that creates complications. So now the source of this problem is the startup cost. Is this non-convex cost. So what to do? How to change the rules to make this work as well as possible. So now we're entering, given this problem, we're entering a zone where traditional economics doesn't work anymore, and people start coming up with heuristic ways for designing auctions that are guided by general principles, but you will see a lot of heuristics for dealing with non-convex costs. Okay, what is one heuristic? One heuristic is basically what I just described. The system operator says, I'll forget about people's startup costs and let them bid in the way that I just described. So basically, the argument I just gave you, the only conclusion you can make from this argument is that truthful bidding is not an optimal strategy for generators in the system. So basically, this mechanism that I just described won't induce generators to say the truth. But that doesn't mean you can't still use it. You can still use this market rule. It's just that all the guarantees that you have from standard theory with convex costs, they don't follow. But you can still use the rule, and that's what's done. The operator says, I don't even want to know about it. I don't care about startup costs. I will just run a day-ahead market like I do run real-time markets, and I'll let generators deal with the problem and incorporate their startup costs in their bids. Okay, that's the idea with exchanges. So this is the approach of exchanges. Do the same, do the auction the same way we've seen in real-time markets, and let people deviate from truthful bidding. Say, submit a fuel cost, which is not really just a fuel cost; it's more. But at least the auction is simple. Now, the advantages of this are that the rules are not too complicated. And that's good because there's fewer gaming opportunities. I'll show you another way to design this market in the next couple of slides, which is called the power pool, which has much more complicated rules. And whenever you have complicated rules, you have the opportunity for traders to play games. But on the other hand, it makes the life for generators more difficult, because now just saying the truth about their costs, in contrast to real-time markets, is not an optimal strategy. Here, if you just say truthfully that my fuel cost is 20 and that's what you bid, you are gonna, if you're in the money, you lose $3,000. So basically, this is the example that I just described. Now, there is an equilibrium in this market. There is a pure strategy equilibrium where everyone bids slightly above 35, and there's no benefit, unilateral benefit from anyone deviating from that strategy. So you can still use this way, this rule to design a market. It's just that it's not inducing you to tell the truth. So this is one approach to dealing with unit commitment. Running a power exchange, which is very similar to the auctions we've seen in real-time markets. This much is clear so far? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I don't understand why it's national above the
25. So think of, I haven't, think of bidding just above 35. Once in a while, and suppose that everyone else does the same, right? So the definition of a Nash equilibrium is I make an assumption about my opponent's strategy, and there is no unilateral benefit for me to deviate, right? So what I was thinking when I wrote this is, suppose everybody bids just above 35.01, and everyone does the same. Once in a while, you will be cleared, you will be in the money, but you will be asked to produce 100, because that's the demand.
Then you lose money.
That's why you bid just above 35. So that whenever you are in the money, you make up for that money,
if you only, it's $70 per megawatt, or if you only produce, your cost
yes.
is $70 per megawatt, or if you only produce 100 megawatt.
So okay, so what
it's not slightly above?
I hear you, yeah, okay, I hear you, it's not slightly above. So, but do we agree that $70 is not a pure strategy Nash? I think, and when I wrote this, that's what I was thinking, but the slightly above is really off, so it's above. But I think $70, so when I wrote this, I had not formally proven it, I just thought the way exactly you're thinking now. And I think that a pure strategy equilibrium is $70 per megawatt hour bid by everybody. I think no one has a unilateral interest to deviate from that. Because if you go below, you're always in the money and you're always losing. And if you go above, you're never in the money, so your profit is zero, like it was when you were bidding 7.
So it is 35 plus epsilon or something like that?
And it's 70 in particular.
Why 70?
In the case we need 100 megawatt, but it will depend on how much they ask us of energy. How much energy they ask.
They will ask you for 100 because the demand is 100.
Okay, that you know when you are bidding or not?
Yes, that's part of the rule of the game. I'm assuming here is you know the demand with certainty.
Okay,
right.
So it's
right. So I think we agree that $70 bid is a pure strategy mesh. In any case, you know that there exists a mixed strategy mesh. Okay, so I'll change this slightly above to just 70. Then what you were saying something? No? You're to add that code? Okay, so that's the exchange. Any other questions about the exchange before we go to a more complicated thing called the pool? We're good. Okay. Okay, pools are in a way more complicated, in a way, well, for some market participants they're much simpler, for some market participants they're much more complicated. Now, how do pools work? In pools, every generator has a much more complex strategy space or bid. They're basically asked to bid everything they can say about their generator. Fuel costs, block bids, your minimum load costs, your startup costs, your ramp rates, your minimum up and down times, all the data that the system operator needs to run a unit commitment, the suppliers are asked to bid it. Loads submit their usual decremental block bids. And then what the system operator does is collects everybody's information, runs a unit commitment, decides on-off schedules, and forces you to stick to your plan. And at the same time, the system operator announces prices for energy and ancillary services. Now, when this is done, for example, in the example we saw earlier, if you force someone to be on and you announce a price for energy, this price, if it's not high enough, that person would not have wanted to be on. So what you do in pools is you go and pay them the extra amount in cash of their lost profit by forcing them to do what the unit commitment problem says. So there's two things going on here. When you solve a unit commitment problem, after every market participant submits their data, the system operator does two things. It announces an instruction to do something and a price for energy. The problem with this is that if for that price of energy, you would have wanted to do something else from the instruction you received, there's an incentive problem there, and to solve the incentive problem, the system operator says, you know what, don't worry, I'll just tell me what you would have done for that price, and how much extra money you would have earned, and I'll give that back to you. We'll see an example to make this clearer. So these side payments, basically, which are called uplift payments, effectively what they're doing is they're paying different participants a different price for energy. So that's kind of one of the criticisms against pools. I know this kind of all sounds very abstract at the moment, but we'll see an example that will hopefully make it clear. Now, the other thing, okay, one more thing I want to say about pools. Pools are much simpler for the generators in the sense that all I need to do is tell the system operator all my parameters truthfully. If they commit me, well, if they don't commit me, I'm off, I'm not making money, no harm done. If they commit me, the worst thing that can happen to me is zero profits, because even if for the price they announce, they make me do something that makes me lose money, they will pay me back through uplift payments. But there's also the chance that I'm if they commit me, the prices are high enough for me to make a profit. So from the point of view of generators in pools, just saying the truth about all your parameters is a fine strategy. Now, banks like, banks that own generators, like JP Morgan, for example, in California, go beyond this and they play games. So they submit bids that, if you look at them, you will say there is no generator that has this kind of profile. It's clearly a lie. The way they do it is they figured out how the uplift payment, they figured out the unit commitment model with the proper data, or approximately, and they know that with these bids, they will get uplift payments. Because they can predict both the instructions they will receive and the prices and how these depend on their bids. So they can pre-compute uplift payments. So JP Morgan applied this trick to the California market for a couple of years, and well, maybe just a couple of months, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission took notice of this, so they got a big fat fine, not even a year ago, I think. Plus the market rules changed.
The price they were saying they could do, was it above or lower?
Well, what they were making big money from was the uplift payments, not the price itself.
But they were losing because they couldn't.
So here's specifically, let me see if I can remember exactly what they did. So they were submitting a very low fuel cost, and they were making their units appear as if their units could go up and down very fast, but then the optimal unit commitment schedule was not moving them up and down very fast. And they said, well, hey, if we could have gone up and down very fast, we would have made a profit. So then the system operator said, okay, that's what my math program is telling me, so here's your uplift payment. Now, this is I'll send you the link with the exact article. It's pretty interesting, but you can see how you can play this kind of games, right?
Intimidated because sometimes you can be asked for something you can't do.
And
in that case, the school, if they say,
right.
Yes, we can run
True.
And they say, okay, do it.
That's true. There are penalties in the market for underperforming. And that doesn't mean that someone will walk up to you with a revolver and
shoot you. Underperforming, you have to pay something that you're
you pay a penalty. But in the meantime, you've been making uplift payments for months until they...
What you have to pay if you cannot perform is fixed. It's not sort of something like a judgment, and then you have to pay an amount you don't know previously. Because then you can play and say, okay, I'm sure I will win because I know I only have to pay that.
There's two things that can happen. Either the penalty for underperforming is too low, or it doesn't happen too often. So in that case, lying and getting uplifts frequently, and once in a while being asked to do something you can't do, no big deal.
But they have all the information and they know it's not going to happen because they run
the unit commitment in advance, which is perfect. I mean, it's not easy to get market data in such detail, but it's possible, and many consultants, that's the value of their companies, is they have entire markets as databases in their software. So you can collect this type of data, especially if you're, a consistent market player. Now, the same idea was with Enron and the tech game. Enron knew that they were, if you remember the way the deck game worked, is you overschedule a huge export to a different zone, you know you're not going to be asked to do that. And what the operator does is it's trying to decongest the line, so it comes up to you and says, here's money to redispatch and reduce that export. But so if you know you're not going to be asked to do that, you can get away with uplift payments. The idea with the deck game uplift payments is very similar, in fact, to the idea over here, the game you can play. So that's kind of the criticism with pools. But the difference between the United States and Europe is that in the US you have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the moment you start fooling around, they step in and they enforce. They make, I mean, they run an investigation, but they have the power to enforce penalties and change rules so that these things are prevented. Whereas in less tightly controlled systems, things can evolve differently. So yeah, typically the pattern in electricity markets is you introduce changes in rules like that. Something really bad happens with some bank or some weird traded power company, then FERC steps in, sends a couple of people to jail, and then the rules change and the whole thing resets. Okay, enough said. That's what I was discussing right now. Yeah. Now, the one thing I want to highlight here is the third bullet. I told you that in pools, the system operator solves the unit commitment problem and determines a forward price. I didn't tell you how they determine it. And how they determine it matters a lot because it influences the uplift payments. So what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is two ways to determine the forward price that have been either used in practice or recommended. So and we're going to use these two methods in a specific example. Okay, so same system as before. One approach that has been recommended for for determining a price for energy is, and this is motivated by the fact that once you fix the unit commitment, then you fall back to a problem with convex costs, in which you can just apply the same theory we used in real-time markets. So really our problem is the unit commitment variable, so why don't we just solve the unit commitment, fix the unit commitment decision, and then look at this problem as a dispatch problem, and solve it as if the unit commitment decision had already been made, and use that price as the price for the auction. Again, does that make sense? We fixed the unit commitment decision, so we're left with the dispatch problem, and then once we're left with the dispatch problem, we can apply the same idea that we use in real-time markets. This is what it does in this problem here. Once you fix the unit commitment decision, this is going to be 0 for everybody except one guy. Okay, and you're looking at this dispatch problem. So I don't have welfare here because I'm fixing the demand. So if you revert back to all the material we've seen up to so far, what you're going to do is you're going to calculate the dual multiplier here, and the price you'll post will be minus this dual multiplier. What's the dual multiplier value here? You can get it just by staring at the problem by doing sensitivity analysis. So if I increase demand by epsilon, minus 2. So the price that will be posted will be 20. For producing, you get paid 20, for buying you pay 20. Now, there will be all but one guy here who was asked to start up. All the guys who kept off, yeah, they're off, no harm. Well, actually, even for those guys, you need to make a calculation to see if they need uplifts or not. You ask them for, if energy price were 20, would you have been willing to start up? And if so, how much profit would you have made? You don't even need to ask them. You can run these computations as a system operator after you've received all the data, right? You don't need to go back to them and ask them to do more bids for uplifts. You can compute uplifts after you receive their data. So you look at their data, everyone bid 20. You notice that for a few, and they have also bid their true startup cost, which is 3,000. You notice that for those guys that are off, 20 wasn't good enough for them to make a profit, so you don't have to pay them any uplift. Because with an energy price of 20, their best reaction would have been to stay off, which is what they did anyways from the unit commitment solution. But there is this one guy who started off. And that guy, you ask him, given an energy price of 20, what would you have wanted to do? He's going to tell you, well, I would have wanted to be off because it's not high enough price to pay for my startup cost. So then you say, okay, given this energy price of 20 and what I made you do, how much money did you lose? You come up with the startup cost, the 3,000. So the uplift is 3,000. This is how this works. Okay, first step, everybody bids. Second step, you solve unit commitments. Third step, you fix the integer decisions and solve dispatch. Fourth step, you calculate uplifts. Okay, and the uplifts depend on the price usually. And I know this sounds like really too many steps, but intuitively, again, the way to remember it is solve the unit commitments and just bribe people to do what the unit commitment is telling them to do, given your price. This is one way to set prices in a pool. So fix the U and get the lambda here. Another way that was proposed by Bill Hogan from Harvard University was, Hogan's motivation was that I'm going to set this price at a level such that I minimize uplifts. For any different price here, and given the unit commitment schedule, you get a different level of uplift. Since Hogan says, well, why don't we just choose the price so that we get the minimum possible uplift? Turns out that the price that does that is the maximizer of the dual function of this problem. It's kind of easy to show using Lagrangian relaxation arguments. So, I mean, with all the background in Lagrange relaxation, you could show this. But I just take it as a given here. What Hogan proposes is we will pick the price that maximizes the dual function. So what is the dual function in this problem? We take the complicating constraint, subtract it from the objective function. So for a given price lambda, the dual function looks like this. The easiest thing to see is for lambda minus 20. When lambda is minus 20, these terms and these terms cancel each other out. And you are left with 100 lambda summation as many times as there are generators. So 100 times lambda times the cardinality of generators, which is, oh, this should be the other way around. Sorry. Okay, and I will correct this in a number. Let's see the case where lambda, do you get it?
Equals should be for the first.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For lambda bigger than minus 20, what's the optimal reaction in the Lagrangian? Now notice that this, once we relax this constraint, this is decomposable by generator, so it's enough to just think of one generator. For lambda bigger than minus 20, so for example, for lambda equal to minus 19, my claim is that it's better to keep the generator off and produce nothing. So for lambda minus 19, minus 20 minus lambda is a negative number. So if I'm maximizing, I want to be as low as possible. Okay, so optimal P is 0. So this thing goes away, this thing goes away, you're left with oh, okay, no, this is correct. Sorry, yes, because here you plug in the minus 20. Okay, sorry for that. So what happened? Okay, we all see this, the first one, But the given lambda greater than minus 20, the optimal thing to do is produce 0. Here, the minus 20, you're left with minus 100 times minus lambda, but I'm fixing lambda to minus 20. And then for the other case, the optimal production is 200. So the phi looks like this. Now, if you draw this dual function, you will notice that it looks something like when lambda is minus 20, it's something over here, minus 2000G. And it goes like this, right? Yes. So Hogan says we choose the minimizer of the dual function as a market, well, minus the minimizer of the dual function as a market clearing price, $20 per megawatt hour. For this really simple example, it happens to be identical to what you get here. In general, it's different. And in fact, it's such that after you calculate the uplift payments are as small as possible. Now, what Hogan did is propose this to the Midwest ISO, but they felt that maximizing dual functions for day-ahead market clearing was a bit too complicated for what they wanted to do. And although it was a good proposition because uplifts are basically exposures of the system operator. It's money that the system operator hasn't collected from anybody and needs to pay to the generators. So for the operator, it's good to find this lambda, but it was too complicated to run these computations day in, day out. So they, as far as I know, the proposal is frozen at the moment. Okay, and with that, we will look into combined cycle units after the break. Investigators focus in part on make-whole payments that grid operators pay to generators if the sale of electricity doesn't yield enough revenue to recover startup costs. That's a pretty general statement in Bloomberg, but then if you go to Washington Post, this is what I remember reading. And let's think a bit of what this means. So in California, JP Morgan allegedly bid minus $30 per megawatt hour in the final hours of a day. Say 23rd, 24th hour, you bid minus 30. And then in the first 2 hours of the next day, they would bid the floor, the ceiling, $9.99. Okay. What happens when you bid minus 30 and the operator solves the unit commitment the day before? You're maxed out, in fact. You're paying to produce. So you will be brought up to your upper limit. If this is your dispatch range, right? Technical minimum, technical maximum, you are sent to the ceiling and you pay 2%, that's how you want to do things. And then and if you think about it, it's the same power plant, and they are claiming that in the end of one day, I wanted to pay to produce. In the context of a pool, this is ridiculous, because in a pool you can say what your real costs are. So this is it's obvious that it's gaming. It's just that there are so many bids that, when something goes wrong, it takes time to discover. That said, they did it here. Then they bid $9.99. So the unit commitment would want to shut them, bring them to technical minimum, or shut them down. But they don't. So the article continues. The going rate at that time between midnight and 2 a.m. averaged at $12. So it says somewhere about ramping. Right, because it is hard to quickly ramp up power plants or store electricity. So if this guy bids $9.99 and he wants all of it, what you want to do, if he's that expensive, is just shut him off.
There is a rundown, so...
But you need to ramp someone up to make up for him going away. And it turns out that the optimal unit commitment schedule says, you know what, for me, despite your really high price, it's preferable that I keep you on for an hour so that I don't have to start up somebody else to make up for you. But then JP Morgan says, well, but it cost me $9.99. So what's your clearing price? Let's run the uplift calculations, and you pay them because they're incurring damages of burning fuel at $9.99 per hour. So they're stealing money out of your pocket. Basically, that's what's going on. You see how this works? They're forced to keep you on. You're making a ridiculous claim about what it costs you to be kept on. Why? Because they don't want to start up somebody else.
How does it come that they don't start up somebody else?
It's if I only make a bid for $9.99 for a single hour, usually startup costs might be about $20,000 per startup. So it's a 20th of the cost. But you're making pretty fine money in the beginning of it. Notice, by the way, it happens in the boundary from one day to the next. So it's harder to get away with this if you try to do it in the middle of the day, because the unit commitment is solved in California at least at blocks of 24 hours. So it misses these boundary effects. But it can, if you do this funny business in the middle of the day, then it will find a way to commit you that won't lead to high uplifts. But at the boundaries, you can fool around like that. Okay. And my voice is abandoning me. Okay, now about your my God. I'm guessing this is one of these. Maybe this one. Yes. So this is the publication by Bill Hogan and his group. And here's an example of how these two pricing approaches are in fact different. He has a figure, don't worry about all the math. Yeah, here's an example. So here what you have is a right, okay, over here. So this is the real marginal cost of some generator. It's a weird combined cycle unit like the model we're going to see now, where as you increase the loading, the marginal cost is definitely not increasing, so the cost is not convex. That's another source of non-convexity, another source of uplift payments. This is not a startup cost, but it's the same nature of the problem. It's a non-convex fuel cost. So the approach, the first approach I showed you, which is called restricted dispatch, okay, this is the convex hull model. So this is the prices generated by the convex hull model, and they look something like the black line over here. Whereas if you use the first model I showed you, you get the first graph. So, right, well, yeah, you get the graph over here, which is also the marginal cost graph of the actual unit. So the two differ. The convex hull is basically trying to trying to approximate this on average. I'm completely unprepared for a full answer to your question, but this is an example where these two things can produce different prices for different output levels. Now, the intuition of why this happens, off the top of my head, I can't give you some answer. That's very easy. But the one takeaway is that if you do the convex hull price, the uplift you will pay will be minimal. It'll beat any other price. Okay, moving on to combined cycle units. Actually, I think that's also one of these. Oh no, I had it already here. Okay. So this is the last discussion about unit commitment. I'm going to talk to you about a math programming model for representing more thermal units in more detail. And this is, for example, particularly relevant to GDF Suez that owns a lot of combined cycle plants. So what combined cycle plants are, they're more complicated than, so one warning is that the next half hour will be a big math program. So plenty of, what we're going to see now is modeling. It's plenty of linear equalities describing the operation of a combined cycle. And okay, so combined cycle units, the feature that they have is that you have many generators that are part of a single plant, and it's quite complex how you operate this thing, because to start up, to fully use the full capacity of the unit, you need to start up these generators in sequence. So you first start up a gas-fired generator, it produces some waste heat, and that drives a steam generator, and you can do this with 3 different configurations. So from the point of view of the system, this is a big generator, but the operator is running basically a thing with many components, and you can only start these up in sequence. Plus, another complication we're going to see is that you get nonlinear fuel cost curves, and I haven't shown you how to program that using a mixed integer linear program. But these units are really important these days because of all the wind integration. These units can move up and down very fast. So, and they're becoming very popular, and also natural gas prices are fairly well, in some places, they're fairly advantageous. So this is kind of a state diagram of what we're looking at. And the one advertisement I'm going to make about this problem is that it's quite relevant in practice. So Adrian Ballant, for example, who's a second-year master's student, took a project for combined cycle unit modeling with a GDF Suez enormous instance. It's a really interesting problem trying to solve this at a large scale. I did some work with Pacific Gas and Electric where they had a really interesting problem about how to operate these units. So it's a really nice applied problem. So the way we model this, the model you see in the literature, the model that GDF Suez uses, and the approach we use with Pacific Gas and Electric is you have a state diagram. You can be in one of 4 states. You cannot be off. Start up a single generator, but to start up a second generator for the plant, you need to have the first one started up. That's basically what these arrows are indicating. They're possible transitions. Okay, and now we want to think of how can we model this as a math program. So what I'm going to use here as capital X is the set of the states or modes of the combined cycle unit. Capital Y is the set of possible transitions, so the arcs in this graph. So to build a mixed integer linear program around this, we introduce 2 binary variables. One indicates which state are we in at each hour. The other indicates did I jump over this arc in that hour, Vyt. So Y is the index of the arc, and it's equal to 1 if we make a jump. So how do you use linear equalities and inequalities to describe this state diagram? That's one of the things we want to think about. The other thing we want to think about is how to represent a nonlinear heat rate curve. What we've seen up to so far in the course is a constant marginal fuel cost. In fact, and for example in Gribig's paper that I showed you earlier, the fuel cost curve looked something like this in Gribig's paper that we just saw a few seconds ago. Whenever this happens in our case, we will ignore it. We will just, if the marginal fuel is decreasing at some level of output, we will assume it's equal to the previous segment. So what you're seeing here is called the heat rate curve. It maps when I'm in a certain state, for example 1, each of these states has its own heat rate curve. Okay? And what this heat rate curve says is, if I'm producing this amount of power from that state, then the total fuel cost is some fixed cost of being in that state plus the integral of this. Yeah, I'm not talking enough to do that. Plus the integral of this thing here up to the production level. This is how to interpret this mapping. Okay, you tell me your power output from that state. The fuel cost is the integral up to that output level. Okay, so if you think about how can I model this as a mixed integer linear program, well, I can use binary variables and I can use continuous variables, but they can only be related through linear equalities or inequalities. What is the one logical condition you want to make sure holds here is that, first trick. I'm going to define a different variable depending on which segment I am in. And the total production is this. So the way to read this jump over here is that if I'm in this mode X, then I can't produce anything less than BPX1, the first breakpoint. Once I enter that mode, I need to produce at least this much. And the question is how much I want to produce in fact. So one logical constraint here is that if PX2 is going to be positive, which is a production in this second segment here, then I have to make sure that the first segment is producing as much as it can. You know, logically, it would make sense if PX1 were positive but not equal to this difference here of breakpoint 2 minus breakpoint 1, and PX2 were also positive. Is that making sense, or have you lost me? You've lost me, okay. Okay, so this, do we have any like specific questions, or like what the hell is this or something like that? Or do you understand what this represents? It's a way to model cost. And let me ask you this a different way. Suppose that fuel costs were constant for this mode. How would this curve look like? Would it be an increasing line or a flat curve? Remember, the way you calculate cost is taking the integral of this.
So it's flat.
So it's a flat line. So then the question I would ask you is, suppose that I wanted the total fuel cost, not marginal, total, to look, well, technical minimum, breakpoint 1. And let's say I'm going to look at 4 breakpoints. Suppose I wanted the total cost curve to look something like this. The way to capture this is by having a marginal cost curve that is, now, it could be the case that what you're seeing here, yeah, this is maybe a bit confusing. So it could be the case that the heat rate at the next segment would be lower, which means for the total cost curve, it would increase at a slower rate and then become higher again. But if this happens, it really makes our life difficult to use. We need extra binary variables, so we say, okay, if this happens, let's just assume that it's constant, in fact, which is the effect of moving this heat rate up over here. Okay? But basically, this is just a trick to represent.
Is that it's not convex? That's the problem. Or if we have a decreasing slope.
Yeah, if you have a decreasing slope, think of what would happen in the optimal solution. What would you choose as P1, P2, and P3 in the optimal solution? If this were lower than all the other guys.
You would like to choose only.
Right. You would start with this segment. You would activate this before activating one, and that's the problem. So then, to deal with that, you would need to introduce binary variables that indicate that I am in this segment or I am in this segment. Okay, if you wanted to work with that, you need a ton of extra binary variables and it makes the model much heavier. So the way to deal with it is you increase it up to the level of the previous segment. Okay, So what else to say? Yeah, the rest here to remember is just notation. So breakpoint 1 up to 4, if you want a 4-segment curve, and heat rate is, you get the idea. Okay, and each mode has a different curve, like this. Now, don't worry, this is just a bunch of stuff that you can add to the model. It's not conceptually very difficult. The model you're looking at here is a model with reserves, where you're producing in a market that is paying reserves. It is paying for energy. The B variable here says you can buy or sell energy. If the B variable is positive, you're buying. If B is negative, you're selling. And then you have a bunch of costs associated with operating your combined cycle unit. You have a variable operating and maintenance costs, which is proportional to your power output. You have fixed costs, so if you're in a certain mode, you pay a fixed operating cost each hour you're running that mode, plus the another fixed cost. I mean, you might as well just think of this as another fixed cost of being in that mode, okay? And it's just that often the data comes in this format with combined cycle units. I can make this representation much simpler in the course notes. And here, what are we representing here? If you remember what the V variable is. There's also what? There's a cost of jumping from mode to mode. Okay, so the message from all this stuff is that it's a very flexible model that can represent a lot of detail. By the way, this can be pretty high in practice. And okay, so here's the constraints for profit. So what you're seeing here could be very well the problem of a company that wants to decide if they weren't going to participate in the day-ahead market, but they just wanted to commit the unit one day in advance, and they had forecasts about real-time prices. They could solve a problem like this and decide how to commit the unit in order to maximize their profits. Well, one of the obligations of playing in the market is that whatever you buy, well, if you're a company that owns a unit like this but also has a bunch of demand, you have to serve your own demand. And you can serve it by either buying or producing from your combined cycle unit. Now, this could be negative, which means if you sell, you have to make up for it by producing. Okay, so this is just an accounting constraint. For example, suppose you don't have any of your own demand.
You sell what you produce.
Right, whatever you sell, you need to produce. And you get paid to sell. You look concerned. I mean, is it unclear?
Just the for BT.
Yes.
What does it represent?
Yes.
Exactly.
Selling or buying power at a certain price, lambda. Okay. If it's negative, you need to make up for it by producing. But when you produce, you have to price. Okay. One of the constraints to account for. Now, how you represent fuel costs. So we have the production at that mode is the first breakpoint plus the contribution from all the other segments. again. And you have to impose a couple of limits here. First of all, the production from a given segment can't be more than the distance between the limits of the segment. So for example, the production from segment 3 can't be more than the distance of 4 minus 3. Then, if I'm not in that mode, so if u is 0, the production has to be 0. Yeah, and this is what I discussed with you earlier. If you want some segments to be producing a positive amount of power, you definitely want to make sure that you've exhausted the previous segment, which you achieve just by changing the data slightly. Okay, that's how we present the heat rate curve. Okay, ramp rates, again, it's not anything extremely deep. It's just that the model is flexible enough to represent also offering reserves. So if you, like in the usual unit commitment model, when we offered reserves, we needed to make sure that the ramp rate was big enough to accommodate our promise for reserves. Now, there's a couple of combinations here to think about. So let's see. If I use this, I will have more. So again, 0, 0 means I wasn't in that state. Well, I wasn't in that state. I didn't come in that state. So there's no ramp rate associated with that state. In which case here you get the right-hand side. Well, if I wasn't at that state, then by a bunch of other constraints that you saw earlier, for example here, the total production will be 0. You buy that? Do you see why u being equal to 0 implies that pxt is 0 for a certain mode? If u is 0 for that hour, for that mode, then this term is 0, and I'm left with these guys, production per segment. But these guys are less than or equal to this stuff, but if we use 0 here, it forces each segment to be 0. That means the total production from that mode is 0. And so, if I wasn't at that state, and I'm not at that state, then this is going to be 0. This is going to be 0.
But for this, the big P is a limit. I mean, it's fixed.
Big R.
It's not a variable.
Big R. Capital R or capital P?
P.
You mean this?
Yes.
It's a big P. It's one thing. It's the breakpoint. So it's these things here. BP1, BP2. Yeah, and the notation is a bit terrible. It's a fixed parameter. It's data. Right. Okay, so non-binding constraints. Well, actually, this could be a bit problematic. Can you see what the problem could be here? As far as this is concerned. It's bad. To cut a long story short, you could be offering reserve, although you're not in that state, because the right-hand side here is just R plus. This goes, well, no, sorry, it's reserve less than or equal to 2 times breakpoint. So this inequality gives you the option of offering reserve, even though you're not in that state. And that's something that's not desirable. So I'll have to change this model a bit to capture that. I had originally written this model without the reserve decisions, so for just energy it worked. But now with the reserve, this is not exactly correct. You see what I'm saying? Or?
Yeah, it's something that I've shown when we are mixing the concept reserve and reserve.
When we are mixing?
Model,
Come again?
It's a bit messy in my head when we are mixing the model with the earlier with the reserve and stuff.
Yes.
I understand it with energy, but when you talk about energy, it's the energy you produce. You didn't take into account the reserve. Everything we saw earlier.
You mean in the first hour?
Yeah.
The first hour put a full stop. That was a discussion about market design.
Okay.
Now we're thinking of an individual company trying to maximize profits in a market with that pays for energy and for reserve.
Yeah, why doesn't the reserve come into account in the market?
I could have added it. Just it would have made my presentation much. In general, it was. If you look at the notes, you can generalize the notes. But if I had added it in the examples, it would have been messy. The same idea could apply in a market that also includes reserve. Now, think from the point of view of a company. If you think about it, it's an interesting trade-off that you have here because you're getting paid a certain price for oil, but you have a forecast about energy, and you have a forecast about reserve up and reserve down, and you have to allocate your available capacity in the mode between the two. So you know how these prices compare to each other will affect your decision a lot. But one thing you want to represent is that both reserve and production are competing for your available ramp rate. Okay, and there's a little mistake here because if I'm not in that mode, the model behaves as if you can offer reserve, whereas when you're not even in that mode. So I'll need to fix that. I'll probably just end up removing reserve from the model and get over it. Okay. Anyway, if you go through these, so what I'll do for, as far as the class is concerned, is remove the reserve variable from the model and just make everybody's life simpler. So if you, yeah.
So just at the end of the course will be just one huge model with everything you saw? Or?
For
just where we're adding
in terms of the. You mean in terms of the future chapter? Oh, as far as showing you a more and more complicated. Okay, one thing I did not mention is this is the most complicated version of short-term models that you will see. We started from economic dispatch, we added transmission constraints, we added reserve, we added unit commitment, end of story for short-term scheduling. But they all really matter a lot. Now on next courses I'm going to move, so in the next course I'm going to talk about hedging risk in the medium term. And reserves and all that are just noise. From the point of view of someone who's taking financial positions years down the line, this is too much detail. But when you're thinking of short-term models, these things matter a lot. So, and finally, the last couple of lectures I'm going to talk about long-term planning models. So after looking at medium-term financial hedging, we'll look into long-term planning of how you invest in capacity, and again, for those models, this becomes noise and it's irrelevant. Okay, and there's a typo here that I need to fix also. This is random, right? In any case, one case that you can see, for example, if you are in a mode, if you were in a mode and you are in a mode, what the constraint here says is this goes away, and you're left with 2 minus 1 R plus, so it's saying that your increase in production minus what you were producing in the previous hour is constrained by your ramp-up rate when you're in that mode. Well, increasing production plus reserve. And you can play with these combinations and see that these inequalities do the job, or they will do the job after I remove reserve. Okay, that's ramp rates. I think that I should just, well, no, we have a couple more minutes. Okay. Here we are imposing, again, well, let me see, okay, if I find a way to deal with that ramp rate constraint and fix it. In this case, what we're saying is if we're, no, so it's taken care of over here, okay. If we're not in that mode, then the reserve up and reserve down decisions are forced to 0. Okay, so it's fine, we're good. Okay. And then also individually you impose these constraints to make sure your reserve doesn't go above your ramp rate. Now, in any given time period, you can't be making more than one jump. You can stay where you are, so your V's could all be 0, but you can't make more than one jump, at most one. You have to be in a certain state at every time period. And when you make a jump in an arc, this relationship says, so if I'm in a certain state X, you got it. So if I'm here and I have this arc, and I will change these to Y's because I was using the Y index in the earlier weighted. So we have this data structure that says this is the from. So X is the from state of arc Y. So what this equality will do is if you end up moving out of that state, you were in it previously, but then I'm looking for all the transitions that have X as a from state, and if any one of these guys is 1, then it will set the U to 0 for the next hour. Which means if I make this jump, then I can't be in this state the next hour. Okay? And the other way around, if I'm not in this arc and I activate any of the, if I'm not in this state and I activate any of the arcs that are pointing into that state, that will bring me into that mode. Okay, so this is just a way to express the state diagram. Then you have up and down times, and these look really messy, but don't, I mean, the thing to remember about this model is just that it can represent a lot of detail. I don't want you to like start freaking out about learning to remember all these constraints for the exam. No, you don't. Understanding minimum up and down time constraints, yeah, that's useful. But all this is doing is generalizing them to represent per mode up and down times. Which means if I walk into a mode, I need to stay in it for at least a certain number of hours, and if I leave the mode, I need to stay out of it for at least a certain number of hours. You can express that. All you do is write the minimum up and down times the way we've seen them per mode. And you have a up time and down time constraint per mode. Here, yeah.
So you say when you enter a mode, you have to stay at least for some time.
Yeah.
And does it, is it possible to, with that constraint, because
not this way.
Is it possible to say that you can go, so you stay at least some time in that, but you have a different time to, you have to wait 5 turns before you can use one transition, but for another transition you have to wait longer.
And transitions?
It's to, so saying you have to stay in a turn, it means you don't use any transition because you stay in that position. But is it also possible to say that the turns you have to wait to go to another position depends on the other position you want to go? I don't know if it's clear.
Well, depends on the other position where you have to go. I don't know if that's even relevant for combined cycle units.
No, it's just a question.
With a model. I would have to think about it, but I actually don't even think that it's relevant in practice. But what is definitely relevant in practice is that you need to let these things cool off or warm up. You can't just be going in and out of them too fast. So then you also have an overall up and down time constraint, which means if you move from off to any state, you need to stay away from off for a number of nodes. And that's represented in these constraints here, bounds and integrality gaps. And there are different approaches for modeling combined cycle units. I showed you one which is a state approach, but there are also bottom-up approaches that are more detailed.